Hello, a very warm and yes, it is almost hot. Welcome to The Big Picture. We are live, as always, on University Radio Nottingham, and I am still Felix. This is the last Big Picture of the academic year, but fear not, my dear listeners, for I will still be here next year for my 5th year in Nottingham. Well, joining us today, two people that will be leaving The Big Picture. This is a very sad time. Rebecca, hello.
Hello.
And James.
Hi.
Hi. But Scarlett, you'll still be with us for at least another year. But still, welcome to you as well.
Hello.
Hello. Okay. We were at Ocean last night, three of us. So forgive my voice. It might vary in its pitch, but we're going to give this a go. So today the topics are going to be Boris Johnson. He's been up to stuff as per usual. Resigned his seat. We'll just discuss what exactly that means, and it could mean a lot of different things. We'll be talking about the new MRP poll. That's a very in-depth constituency by constituency poll that's come out for the Best of Britain, which is an organisation. And we'll also be talking about politics from the from the USA, which is a new economic partnership. And Mike Pence has announced that he's going to try and challenge Trump for the nomination of the Republican Party. So let's talk about everyone's favourite blonde-haired politician. Now, I can tell our lovely listeners that our three panellists here are not fans of Boris Johnson for reasons I can't comprehend. But so I, as the neutral host, which has got no political opinions at all, might have to vouch for the Johnsonite viewpoint at times. I'm only doing that out of my duty for the big picture. So first of all, Boris Johnson was under investigation by the Standards and Privileges Committee for lying to Parliament. It appears, it's being reported, that he was told yesterday that they were going to recommend a 10-day suspension, which would mean a by-election could have been called in his seat. Basically, a recall petition could have been put forward by his constituency. So his critics are claiming he's jumped before he was pushed. He says he's been pushed by a kangaroo court, which is predominantly made up of Conservative MPs, and had they found him guilty, it would have gone to the House of Commons, which is made up of majority of Conservative MPs, and then it would have gone to his constituency, which by the last election was made up of mostly Conservative voters. But it was a kangaroo court, according to Johnson. So what do we make of this? I mean, not just Johnson resigning his seat, but we've also lost two Johnson loyalists too. Nadine Dorries, who represents Mid-Bedfordshire, a very safe Conservative seat, not like Johnson's, which is not so safe. But also Nigel Adams, he's resigned today. Unfortunately, in the sort of furore of all of this, I don't actually know what seat he represents. Selby, is it, I think? Apparently, according to, is it Christopher, I don't know, is it the Telegraph political editor? The one who does Chopper's podcast, him. That one. He's claiming that he feels that there could be more resignations to come. So what is going on here? What is the plot? Now, I have to admit that this news came out when we were at a lovely pub in Nottingham called the Rose and Crown. And, James and I were having a meal with others first. But we discussed, and I thought, with Nadine Dorries' resignation, it was my impression, although I don't have any impressions, but I came up with my first one, that maybe Boris Johnson was going to try and stand in Nadine Dorries' seat, which is much safer than his. But now I'm not entirely sure what the plan is. Bearing in mind when he said and called the Privileges Committee a kangaroo court, and I will argue in that position for Boris's sake in a minute, but that when he wrote about that, he also said, or spoke about that, he also said that he was gone for Parliament for now. So Is this the last we've seen of him? Lots to unpick here. I'm going to go to Rebecca because she didn't go to Ocean last night, so I'm going to give Scarlett and James a bit more thinking time. Rebecca, what do you think? Big up Rose and Crown supremacy. We've had a message in. Rebecca, what do you think to all of this?
I think that, I don't think it's the last we've seen of Boris Johnson by any means. I'm sure he's just biding his time. I think it's really hard to know what he's going to do next, though, like to speculate. I don't think he'd stand independently, so I just, I'm not sure. And I'm not sure about the Nadine Dorries thing either. I think it'll be clearer when the report actually comes out. And yeah.
So, I mean, some people are reckoning, some commentators or people that have access to a Twitter account, are saying that is this Johnson trying to bring down the government by just trickling by-elections? And if so, what's the point of that? Is it simply to just make Rishi Sunak fail because he doesn't like him? What do you think, James?
Well, I do... At first, I did think this was just sort of like a, you can't fire me, I quit situation from Johnson, because he was probably going to, lose his seat potentially if, when the report came out anyway. So I do think that, I did at first think that, but now, given the Nadine Dorries news and now Nigel Adams and now rumours, like you said, that there's probably more to come, I do think it's a little bit more coordinated as like you said, an attempt to potentially not bring down the government, obviously, because I don't think you can really do that with a bunch of by-elections, but it definitely helps show how, I guess, what Boris wants, which is to show that the current government is unpopular, because they're probably going to lose all these by-elections, let's be honest, apart from maybe in, Nadine Dorries' seat, because it's, such a safe seat, but apart from that if more by-elections come, they'll probably lose those as well. So I guess it's an attempt by Boris's clique to try and show how unpopular the government is. And I mean, to be fair, it could, push a couple of other Tory MPs to submit letters of no confidence in Rishi Sunak, because stuff like this has happened before. The by-elections, failure in by-elections has brought down leaders before. So I wouldn't be too shocked if that's the play here. And then Johnson gets to... I assume he's going to try and return in 2024. He's not going to try and go for Nadine Dorries' seat. He's going to try and return in 2024 as, the man who's never lost, win another seat in a Tory safe seat, if they'll have him, which is a whole other argument. But I think that's the plan. This is just another spectacular way he's been able to grab the media attention, out of nowhere. Given that merely a few months ago when he had the hearing, we were talking about how this was probably, the end of the line for him. He's somehow been able to, become the centre of political discussion again, out of nowhere. So, and I definitely don't think this will be the last we see of him. I don't think this is just him packing it in. I think he's, the for now, at least for now, is doing a lot of heavy lifting, I think.
It's interesting he's resigned at a similar time when the Daily Telegraph ownership is currently up for a purchase. We've had some messages in before I go to you, Scarlett. I just think this is the message in. I just think the fact that in times of hardship, Boris Johnson and the Conservative government can't possibly stay in their seats and their jobs, whereas Felix can crawl from the depths of the Ocean nightclub and still deliver good public service. It's just funny. Do I know much about politics? No. I'm just saying what I see. We've also had a message, we free Irish, I wonder who that could be, understand the tyranny of Whitehall, we stand with Boris. And also a point about Central Bedfordshire went to no overall control in the local elections, so it might not be as safe, and its majority is only slightly more than, was it Tiverton, the seat of the man that likes looking at tractors, from earlier on. Scarlett, what do you think to this? You, when we were in Rose and Crown, you were reading the news. Have you got any inside information?
I don't know if this sort of plan is a sort of coordinated attack, as some are suggesting. I think it's too convenient that within a few hours Nadine Dorries resigns and suddenly Boris Johnson also resigns. I think perhaps Nadine Dorries, unfortunately for her, is not as close as she thinks to Boris Johnson, and she perhaps did this thinking that, you know, they'd leave it a few days to settle. I think it is quite strange to both resign in the same day because it looks too coordinated, if that makes sense. It looks too much like a plan. Equally, I think the Mid-Bedfordshire constituency is about 25,000 vote majority. So I think it is possible it could be overturned. I don't know who's the second party there. I'd assume it's
Labour.
Is it Labour, perhaps? It would be a good showing, we're about to talk later in the polls, that if Labour were able to get that seat in a by-election, it would support, I think, the most extreme planning that the poll has, showing that the like Keir Starmer and his government would get a seat count that is about the same as the 2005 election won by Labour. So that could be quite interesting. In terms of Boris Johnson, I agree with James that I think he'll come back in 2024. I think it is likely that Rishi Sunak will lose the election in 2024, and then Boris Johnson will attempt to return as the leader of the opposition and come and save the Tory party. However, it doesn't appear to seem like he has as much support as he used to. I read Chris Mason's sort of report on what's been going on, and he says, you know, MPs, some of them are talking to me privately, but it's only Nadine Dorries and Nigel Adams that have actually gone out and resigned, and there isn't this flurry of by-elections that perhaps Boris Johnson was hoping for, which I find quite interesting. But we saw in the Windsor framework vote that I think only about 20 MPs voted against it. I know there were lots of abstentions, yeah, but I don't. If you just look at the pure, there's a lot more people in the middle than there used to be. You used to either be a Boris supporter or you weren't, and now there's many more people in the middle. And it just seems a bit rogue what he's done. Like, if you read the statement, clearly nobody's read over it with all his claims of a kangaroo court. And because it is clearly not a kangaroo court, all the Privileges Committee would do is make a recommendation that the MPs should vote on whether they should vote on whether constituents should have a say, that 10% of the constituents voting that they want a by-election. That is a formal process. That is not a kangaroo court. I think it's just ridiculous what he's saying, and I find it quite interesting that he also had dinner with Trump last week. So I wonder where that kind of language came from.
Well, if Boris Johnson was here right now, which I know the panel would love, but he might say, okay, people like Yvonne, what's her name? Harriet Harman, sorry. Yvonne Hartman was a character in Doctor Who. Harriet Harman, who's chair of the Privileges Committee, a member of the Labour Party, she's made comments in the past that would suggest that Johnson was guilty before the investigation even began, and some of the Conservatives on there, such as Charles Walker, Alberto Costa, are not massive fans of Boris Johnson. He'd also point to the fact that Sue Gray, although that's a separate report, is now the Chief of Staff for Keir Starmer, and would say that this is all part of the attempt of the Blob and the Liberal elite, maybe the Anti-Growth Coalition, we can throw that in there too, to get rid of Brexit, and that is something that he's arguing. And he's also arguing that the members of the Conservative Party are guilty of this too. James, what do you reckon to that?
Well, I do think that the Trump comparison is very interesting, because I think the whole thing of like Boris being like the UK's version of Trump was a bit, you know, Boris wasn't that bad, we all used to say, but when he's using language like this, as he saw in his 1,000-word resignation letter, talking about it as a kangaroo court, and he was forced out by the Blob. It is straight out of the Trump playbook right here. The problem is, it's a parliamentary committee. Obviously, most of them are going to have said something either positive or negative about Boris Johnson, and most of the time it's going to be negative, let's be honest, you know. Like, should every single, like, member of the committee like recused themselves if they've ever tweeted something bad about Johnson. Like that's just stupid, I guess, in my opinion. It's a stupid excuse to imply that the committee was like, out to get him from the start, even though, as has been said, these are formal processes. This is how it's always been. So I don't know. I think that criticism, that whole criticism that it is a kangaroo court and that it's made up of people who are out to get him from the start, I think it is very Trumpian to try and undermine the legitimacy of the committee, even though again the committee has done all this work, has done all this research, is made up of Tory MPs, even though some of them are Johnson critics. They're still Tory MPs. There are still some less Johnson critical MPs on there. So I don't know. I think that criticism from Johnson doesn't really stand up, and is just very populist and Trumpian.
So let's say Johnson does try and take another seat for the 2024 election. It's possible that Sunak could block him from standing in a similar way to the process of what's going on in Labour with Corbyn. It is very interesting. I don't know if anyone can say otherwise, panel or listeners, but is this not an unprecedented situation where we've had both leaders of major parties gone at the election from their parties, that is? Not that Johnson's been expelled from the Conservative Party, but you know what I mean. Since the last election, Corbyn and Johnson. Is Sunak going to do that, or do you believe that would be too risky for him politically? As although maybe the Johnson level of support has dwindled, it's still much higher in the Conservative Party than perhaps the love of Corbyn is in the Labour Party, who, of course, didn't actually, the Parliamentary Labour Party, ever vote for Corbyn to be their leader. Rebecca, what do you think to that?
Can I just clarify what the question was? Sorry, I got a bit lost.
Sorry. What do you think? Can Sunak, should Sunak or will Sunak block Johnson from standing in a separate seat, or use whatever powers he does have to try and ensure that doesn't happen, to see Johnson trying to return in 2024?
Right, yeah. I don't think he would, in the sense that I feel like that maybe would draw the wrong kind of attention. I think as much as Rishi Sunak probably is sort of concerned about Boris's presence and Boris-like MP's presence within the party and potentially disrupting sort of the unity in the party, I don't think he wants to sort of add more fire to the conflict in a way. So I feel like he probably wouldn't. I think, and just sort of, in many ways, I think Boris may sort of self-destruct, of course. He creates his own problems. So I don't even think Rishi sort of would need to do that. And I think probably he'd rather stay out of it and try and be the more sort of reasonable Conservative and not get involved in it. That would be my take. Interesting.
How many more by-elections do we think are going to happen? Or do you think Nigel Adams is going to be the last one? Scarlett, I'll go to you first on that.
I personally have no idea, because I don't know how much support Boris Johnson still has within the party. I think there are a lot of undecideds. As for Rishi Sunak's political judgment, I believe, I don't know. Again, I think that he's not showing great political judgment at the moment. If you see yesterday, he waved through all of Boris Johnson's honour list, which was just a list of cronies, essentially, and people that have been loyal to him. And I think that the fact that Rishi Sunak didn't sort of realise that Boris Johnson would have gotten hold of a report of the report that the Privileges Committee gave on the same day that he was going to wave through the honours list perhaps suggests that he doesn't really get the feeling of Parliament, where they stand, even what's going on. I think also if you make a comparison to Keir Starmer, back when Keir Starmer was elected in 2020, he was still very middle of the road on Corbyn. Like, it was still kept some of the Corbynite policies. He certainly wasn't going to expel him back then. It took him 3 years of sort of quashing down the left in the Labour Party for him to be able to expel Corbyn, whereas Rishi Sunak is I think, however so many months into his premiership, I don't think he has the judgment or the support of the party to be able to make such a big decision about a former leader.
Yeah, well, that is a good point, really. Yeah, that even though he has more MPs, does he have less of a grip on that party? Or maybe it's harder if you've got a larger party to deal with. But yeah, it doesn't have the same level of capital as Starmer does. James, what do you think? Do you think we're going to get more by-elections? Sorry.
I mean, to be fair, I think it's a real 50-50, because on the one hand, that there are rumours going around that there are going to be more, but on the other hand, the Nadine Dorries and Nigel Adams are like two of the, real deal big Boris super fans. The only other one that's sort of comparable is like Jacob Rees-Mogg and stuff like that. So unless like the slightly less Boris super fans start resigning, I don't know, this might just, fizzle out. On whether Rishi should block Johnson, I actually think he definitely should, because my God, it would make things a lot easier for Rishi, in my opinion, because Johnson is like a dangerous man for Rishi's premiership, and he's a lot. Even though he's still influential and powerful outside Parliament, it's a lot more difficult to be influential and powerful outside Parliament for an extended period of time. So if Sunak just blocked Johnson from standing in 2024, didn't let him take any safe seat, sure, Johnson would kick up a fuss. All of his remaining supporters within in Parliament would kick up a fuss and get a little bit angry, but I think in the long term it would probably make Sunak's life a lot easier. Could potentially allow him to stay on after the next election, because if we're talking about the obvious Johnson play of him trying to become leader of the opposition in 2024, I'm sure Sunak's thought about it, so it becomes a lot easier if you eliminate your greatest threat. And in a way, Johnson has kind of eliminated himself by doing this, I think, Johnson is sort of, assuming that Sunak's not going to block him, but I think Sunak blocking him it will hurt him in the short term, like I said, support-wise, but I think in the long term, it will protect Sunak's premiership a lot more than playing all hands off.
Okay, thank you. I'm going back to what you said, Scarlett, about Rishi Sunak waving through the resignation honours. Without going too much into the sort of whole process of this, I think it's still interesting to make this point about resignation honours and whether or not they should be a thing. And it is. I think it's very, very, very rare. I mean, if not unprecedented, for a Prime Minister to refuse the resignation honours of their predecessor, although in this case, of course, it is predecessor's predecessor because of the short tenure of Liz Truss meant she wasn't around to do that. Of course, we might also have her resignation honours to come as well. Would it have actually just caused too much of a furore if he had done that? But also, we had heard rumours that people like Nadine Dorries was going to be offered a peerage. Now, it isn't really allowed for you to be offered a peerage if you're in the House of Commons and not 6 months away from a general election. It's a bit of a surprise to see that she stepped down as an MP but wasn't given that peerage. So what do you think happened there? I know we don't know, it's all speculation, but what do we think happened?
Perhaps she thought that she heard that the honours list was getting passed through and didn't think that Rishi Sunak would block any of them, therefore she would be included. But that would be quite strange to do, considering it was after it got reported to the media, so I don't really know what's going through her head. I think she had gotten quite disenfranchised with Parliament in general, seeing that you know, you might say the love of her life is has fallen from the top job. What I found quite interesting is, you know, Rishi Sunak talks a lot about integrity, professionalism, you know, upholding these values, and, you know, this adding these people into the House of Lords is going to make it an even bigger mockery than it is. And I think that's really despicable. It's meant to be a revising chamber that's full of experts of our country and able to scrutinise legislation, and it's just full of Boris's friends. You know, there's an advisor in there that's not even 30 years old. What can he contribute? Anyone?
Yes, well, as the sort of representative of Boris Johnson for today, perhaps he... I'm struggling. Maybe, you know, he's a star of the future, and his ideas on levelling up and support for Brexit is why he should be there. I don't know if this is a joke or not, so forgive me if it is. Don't hold this as gospel, but that maybe Boris Johnson's hairdresser was included on the list. Well, it wouldn't be the first time a hairdresser was on there. Tony Blair's wife's hairdresser was on his resignation list. So it does show that the whole resignation honours is something that is always controversial. I'm curious as to what we think about Rishi Sunak's future. Just to finish off on this topic, I don't think it's out of the question to say that letters of no confidence will be going into him. Although, of course, Johnson's supporters going means they're going to be, if they do win the by-elections, will be replaced by people that are likely to be more Sunak sympathetic. But if these by-elections all go terribly for Sunak, which is possible that they could, do you think we're going to have another Conservative leader before the next election?
I seriously doubt it. If they stand any chance of minimising the loss or perhaps creating a hung parliament, I believe they will keep Rishi Sunak. He is liked more than the rest of the party, and despite these sort of mishaps of political judgment, I don't believe a lot of the public pay attention to them. I think you sort of think, oh, that person's going into the Lords, and you get when the newspaper puts forward certain people in their headlines. However, as you just said with Tony Blair, we talk about Howard Wilson's lavender list. You think about the figures like Michelle Mone being put in by David Cameron. So this is not a new thing at all. If you go back to David Lloyd George, like, it's such a common thing that it doesn't really play with the members of the public. Therefore, I don't think that this would hamper the perception of the public has on Rishi Sunak. So I certainly think that the Conservative Party will keep him into the next election. Whether they'll keep him as leader of the opposition, as I think the Conservatives will become, I don't know.
Any other thoughts from Rebecca and James about this?
I mean, I completely agree. I think that he will remain in his position. I don't think it would it would be suicide for them to do anything else. But also, I mean, it's hard to know. I also just don't think within the party, I don't think he is disliked to that extent. I don't think, not to disrupt it further again. So I think he'll remain.
And James, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think he'll remain. I mean, his biggest, I guess, potential opponent just quit. So, unless suddenly, like, in the week to come, there's like 30 by-elections, if you get to that sort of point where there's Tory MPs resigning every day for the next month, then maybe other Tory MPs think it's probably time to, last resort, swap him out for someone else. But yeah, no, I don't see him being kicked out by anyone, because again, his biggest opponent is now gone, and it would just be complete, even though they are already electorally in the toilet in the polls, it would further just destroy them. I think that would be the final nail in the coffin for, like, there's not even, like, we wouldn't even be talking about potentials for a hung parliament at that point. It would be like a 100% Labour victory if they try and swap prime ministers again.
Yeah. All right. Just before we go to our first music break, we've had some more comments. Just saying, everyone loved Boris until it was found out that he might be a Catholic. Anglicans still run the country and must be expelled. I, along with a bunch of people, I bet, are certain that all this country's problems can be solved under the leadership of Harriet Jones, former Prime Minister. That's a sneaky little Doctor Who joke for those of you, for those that don't know. Of course, I do know that. And Boris couldn't even do Brexit properly, so the notion that people are conspiring against him because of his role in that is laughable. And as the Thursday Pulse's voice of the people, we get these BBC News notifications saying this person has left the government, and we go, oh, cool. Or who? The only one who's made big waves, or someone that's been recognised, is Bojo. That is a good point. Right. Yes, I suppose that Johnson is hoping that the British public will once more in the future potentially take a chance on him.
This is URN.
Hello and a very warm, very, very warm welcome back to The Big Picture. We are live on University Radio Nottingham and I am still Felix Hawes. We've had some messages in. Let's read them. Okay. Hi, Felix. Loving the show so far. Love from all your fans at Woollerton Park. Thank you very much. And great song choice, Felix. They should have played the entirety of this song in Ocean last night from Hannah. Quite right, Hannah. They should have. Right. Our second topic is on the MRP poll. So this is an in-depth poll looking at constituency by constituency because, of course, national trends, national swings don't occur the same in every single seat. And this is the first one that's been done since the new boundaries have been announced. It's a very interesting set of results. So it says that it is a potential that the Labour Party will win 470 seats out of 650. That would be the largest landslide since the national government in 1935, where the Conservatives would be reduced to just over 100 seats. So very, very... very poor for the Conservative Party. But there was more to this than meets the eye, however, and it does show there is quite the range of results that could occur. It said that if Reform UK, that is the new version of the Brexit Party, stands down, as they did last time in Conservative seats, and Don't Knows, which currently hold the third largest amount of polling, if Don't Knows side with the demographic trends, of which Don't Knows are currently include, then it could be a hung parliament. So it's quite the range that could occur, and I think that Professor Curtis, who often gets wielded out at times of general elections, has said that the election is still not in the bag for Labour. But it does show you that there could be that's a huge range of 316 to 470 seats that could occur. The other interesting piece of information from the poll was that Labour is predicted to be the largest party in Scotland again for the first time since 2010, with the SNP reduced to, I think, 20-something seats. I can't remember exactly. So a lot to unpack there. I think we probably should also include the fact that Nigel Farage has been hinting at a potential return, and that could cause a lot of damage to the Conservatives as well. I'm going to go to you first this time, Scarlett. What do you make to this poll?
I find it concerning that there's such a wide range. I'm quite sceptical of polls in general, just because of look at what they can produce, and the way that they both comment. So that I don't know how many people were asked in this poll, but they take a small sample of the population and then make these very dramatic statements that are very often both too conclusive and too inconclusive, and then that further influences how people will vote. So I think that it could be any, but it is true that at this stage in the electoral cycle, I think it could be anywhere from a hung parliament to the massive landslide that you mentioned. I believe it will be closer to the hung parliament. I think that if Rishi Sunak gets to actually achieve some of his objectives, especially the small boats one, which seems to have actually cut through in like focus groups and things, that it would be, I think Keir Starmer will probably get quite a slim majority, close to the one in 2015. However, if Rishi Sunak doesn't achieve his objectives, if he gets more trouble within his party, if they look disunited, if he shows more naivety in political judgment, it could be perhaps closer to 2019. But I don't think it's anywhere near the sort of declaration that was made in the poll with 400 odd seats.
MRP polling, of course, is more accurate than your average opinion poll, but as you say, Scarlett, it can still be wrong. The MRP poll that was done in advance of the 2019 general election had the Conservatives winning, but not by as much as they ended up doing. I think it was reported that John McDonnell's Spectre Jeremy was furious with it and called YouGov a Tory Scrooge or something like that, some sort of Tory polling company that were lying about the polls.
Yeah, can I clarify? Is YouGov the one that's owned by Nadeem Zahawi?
It was founded by him. I don't know if it's owned by him or not,
I don't know
but
if he
yes.
does shares in it.
Maybe John McDonnell was right. Although of course the Tories did win a large majority. I mean, we've got to remember that Labour won 200 seats in the last, just over 200, I think 202 seats in the last election. That is a mountain to climb. It's been done before, it has to be said, but it is a mountain to climb. Although it's important to remember that the electorate are a lot more volatile now than they used to be, of which I mean by that people do change their minds between elections a lot more frequently than they used to. So it's certainly doable. James, what do you make to this?
Well, I'm going to be a little more optimistic, I think, about this poll, because I think the other bits that are on the showed the hung parliament result are a bit, in my opinion, a bit dodgy in the sense that if Reform UK do a thing that they're not going to do, because I'm pretty sure you told me the other day, Felix, that Nigel Farage said that making that deal with the Tories was a massive mistake that he's not going to that he wouldn't do again, I
did say that.
And even though he's not involved in the party anymore, I feel like they're gonna, the rest of the party, the rest of Reform UK, all 5 of them probably agree with him there. And I think that the way they did the demographic thing was based on education level, so it wasn't a very exact thing at all, really. So I think the poll is a very positive sign for Labour, but I do echo what the panel has said so far. Polling has been pretty rubbish for the past, few years. I mean, go back to 2016, no one thought Trump would win, and then he won. And, we thought that we'd fixed polling, I say we, but, we thought the polling...
James, you did it.
I personally, no. We thought that the polling had been, the mistakes had been seen and fixed now, but all you need to do, it's still happening. I mean, if you look at in Turkey, the result was on the actual voting day, Erdogan won far more votes than the polling had him doing. The polling had him losing the election, some polls, or quite a lot of polls, and then he came out to almost win it in the first round. So I do still think there's something missing with polling. They generally do disproportionately affect right-wing parties. So right-wing parties generally do worse in polls. So I do think that in that sense, you can't say that Labour's already won. But a poll that looks this good, it's difficult to not be optimistic about it, in my opinion.
Let's bear in mind, if they do win close to the 470 mark, most of Labour's MPs don't even exist right now in terms of being in Parliament, which is strange to think. Rebecca, what do you make to it?
I mean, I agree with what the panel's saying about polling in general. I have slightly more faith in the MRP polling in that there is more mathematical basis to it. I also think that the picture that it paints doesn't sort of, I would agree with in general anyway, with what I think sort of is happening politically. Of course, it's really hard to estimate, as far as sort of the silent majority or the British equivalent of that. It's hard to know how many sort of Conservative voters there are accurately. But I mean, as far as being optimistic, I don't think there'll be a hung parliament. If I was to really speculate and hedge my bets, I would say there probably isn't going to be a hung parliament, but I also agree that I don't think it's going to be a clear win for Labour by any means. I think it will be very close. That would be my guess.
Okay, so the other big thing is as I mentioned in the introduction, is Scotland. The SNP are not going to be the largest party in Scotland anymore. That's what the poll is saying, and Labour will replace them as that. It does seem that although Labour has grown in support in Scotland, it's mostly due to SNP just sort of shredding their voters not literally, but at every corner. What do we think to that? James, what do you think to the SNP's chances in Scotland? Also, of course, are the Liberal Democrats going to replace the SNP as the third party again and get that crucial, is it 2 questions at Prime Minister's questions?
Well, it is really quite amazing how the stars are aligning for Labour, just at the same time that Keir Starmer's sort of fixed the Labour Party and, they're doing decently in the polls. At the same time as that happening, the Tories are burning themselves to pieces with Liz Truss's disastrous premiership. At the same time as that, the SNP is tearing itself apart with financial issues. It is almost eerily perfect for Labour to do well, So I think that's very exciting news. I think it's news that we predicted when the whole financial troubles of the SNP came out a few months ago. Labour were already doing quite a lot better in Scotland anyway, and that was sort of the nail in the coffin for the SNP's chances of being, the massive, the monolith that they were in previous elections. So yeah, I think it is quite likely that Labour will be the largest party in Scotland, which is huge again. Very important as well that people were worried that people have been saying for years now that Labour can't win an election because they need that, in all previous elections they needed the Scottish seats, and people just assumed the SNP would never fall. Well, here we are. The SNP are sort of collapsing. So yeah, perfect storm. Love it.
So it's all good news.
Thumbs
all
up
good news
from
for
me.
Labour supporters.
Yeah.
That's a good point you mentioned there, James, about Labour needing Scotland, because they actually haven't won in England since 2001. So the year of which some of us were born. That's a long time ago. What do you make to it, Rebecca, about Scotland and Labour? Do you think this is likely? It does show the SNP actually will get more votes than Labour, but tactical voting, I think, is a bigger thing in Scotland, which might benefit Labour. And also, Labour's vote is concentrated in a lot of the central belt seats, so in Glasgow and around Edinburgh as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's very important, kind of the changes that have been happening, and Scotland is obviously very important for Labour voters, or the lack of voting for Labour that has been the case. So I think it will play a factor. I don't think the SNP is going to completely collapse and then Labour's just going to take over Scotland. I don't see that happening. But I think what's interesting is if there are kind of a trickle of sort of Labour seats in Scotland, what that will mean for the future, and whether this will eventually the SNP will just lose its sort of the grip that it has on Scotland.
It's interesting. Scarlett?
Yeah, I think the range in the polling can be explained by the amount of conditional factors, one of which is Labour winning Scotland. So I think if Labour wins Scotland, as you're discussing, and Reform stand in every seat, and perhaps there's some misjudgments by the Conservative Party and it appears not united, then perhaps you could get closer to the seats you're talking about. In terms of Labour in Scotland, it's difficult to tell. It's how much the SNP associate independence with voting at the Westminster elections, because I think there's been more discussion about the fact that independence may not be on top of them, as I think that Nicola Sturgeon said was going to have the 2024 election be the sort of de facto referendum on independence, where I do not believe that that's what Humza Yousaf is proposing. Therefore, they're going to the voters in Scotland are going to look a lot more at the track records of the parties, especially the SNP, in things like education and health, in which they've not been doing particularly well on. And you look at that,
saying something, yeah.
And so I think that I think there's one Labour MP in Scotland currently. I certainly think there'll be many more Labour MPs returned to Westminster from Scotland. However, will they be the biggest party? I think it's uncertain. SNP supporters, they're very ferocious, they're very loyal. I think it would take a lot for them to switch from the SNP, but obviously Labour is a much more viable alternative for SNP voters than Conservatives. So I think they will certainly increase the amount of Labour MPs in Scotland. However, will they become the biggest party? I think that's yet to be seen. It depends. Labour's victory depends on the actions of all the other parties, which is quite interesting. It's not really about their own positive message, which I think they're struggling to find, because they can't even claim the Green message anymore, seeing as they're having to dilute their Green policy. So it's interesting to see how their victory and the extent of their victory depends. It's not in their own hands, it's in the hands of the other parties.
Well, let's see whether or not the Conservative Party, the SNP and the Labour left can all reorganise themselves for next year's general election, or of course 2025 it could be. I think we're going to go into our last topic now rather than a musical break, just based on the time. But we've had we've had a message in. Poll is misinformation. Sinn Féin will win every seat. That would be a troublesome for our democracy, because Sinn Féin don't take their seats, so we'd have no government. Although, I suppose some people would argue that we're already in that case. Okay, so our last topic then is about the USA. A new economic plan has been announced, not a trade deal, but an economic plan. Between the Biden administration and the Sunak administration. This just means closer partnership in economic matters going forward, and shared goals such as keeping Russia out of a lot of world affairs, and both governments' commitment to the net zero aim. Also in America, we've had news, as we talked about last week, it was likely to happen, that Mike Pence, the former vice president, has announced that he is going to stand in the Republican primaries against his former boss, Donald Trump. The two of them, of course, have fallen out after Mike Pence said that Joe Biden won the 2020 election. James, what do you think to these both of these American news?
Well, the new partnership thing is a bit of a nothingy thing, to be quite honest, in my opinion. It's not a trade deal, it's not like a big, massive diplomatic coup or anything. It's just a sort of, shaking hands, good job everyone, let's keep being friends and keep Russia and China out of it, etc. So, it's alright. It's whatever, in my opinion. The whole Mike Pence running, Chris Christie running, honestly, if you want something funny, just look at the amount of people running for the Republican nomination. It's an absolute mess. There's like 15 of them now, and most people couldn't name 3 of them. Well, we could probably name 4, but
we're an odd bunch, though, aren't we? Let's be honest.
There's just so many people going for it, which I think is very funny, given how monolithic Donald Trump's support still is within the Republican Party. And if you don't like Donald Trump, you're probably supporting Ron DeSantis. So it's quite interesting seeing a lot of candidates coming out to try and make a big move. I honestly don't understand why they do it. I think it's very poor, a very poor political move. I get it in the sense that running at least heightens your profile on across the country. We saw that in 2020. Pete Buttigieg did surprisingly well, but didn't win the nomination. Obviously, Joe Biden did, but now he's Secretary for Transport or whatever.
Yeah.
And it looks like his political career, as he might be a presidential candidate again in the coming years. So I get that it helps elevate some careers sometimes, but I think honestly, what a waste of money and time for most of these people.
It's very expensive. That's the point.
Trump is just going to win again. Chris Christie has said he's running so that he can wreck Trump in a debate like how he did with Marco Rubio in 2016. That's not going to happen, let's be honest here. So I think all these people announcing that they're running for the Republican nomination is a waste of, well, to be honest, it's a waste of their time. They could probably be doing something better with their time, and definitely their money. So
it's more interesting for us, though, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I like watching it. The debates are always exciting.
Mike Pence versus Donald Trump is going to be a sight to behold. Maybe not for Mike Pence. Rebecca, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I agree that it's sort of a lot of not much. I don't think it's particularly great for the UK. I think it would be good to see some more like substantial actual agreements being made and things like that. I don't know really what else to really make of it other than it's not really much of anything. I mean, it's kind of good, obviously, but I would like to see some more substance, basically.
Scarlett, what are your thoughts on Mike Pence? I want to know, are you a Pence fan? You want a butt of that 4% that want him to be
4%? That's more than I thought.
Yeah, 4%.
God.
That does mean he can actually join the debates because you have to be a percent in the polls, which does mean that actually quite a lot of these people, James, that you mentioned, that
These
no one
nobodies
knows, won't actually make it onto any of the televised debates.
You know what? I hope they do.
Yeah.
I hope there's 15 people on that stage going absolutely nuts because it would be absolute hellfire and I would love it. I think it's a waste of time for Mike Pence. He's just boring. Like, the one thing about American politics compared to UK politics is it's just more fun. And you know what? Mike Pence would probably fit in here with how dull he is. Also, where's his support? The fact that he became vice president under Trump means that he lost a lot of his, conservative Christian support, considering the things that Trump has said in the past, particularly concerning his attitude to women. I think that, I think that even the support that he had that made him vice president, he does not have again. But I hope he gets that, he maintains that 4% in the polls, and I hope that every minor candidate gets at least that 1%, because I need some entertainment this summer.
I'm afraid to say, for those wanting that box office Republican debates, it's being rumoured that Trump might not even turn up to the first debates to let his opponents all just fight each other, and then he just comes in at the end. It'll be interesting to see. Well, my dear listeners, this is the final big picture of the academic year. As I said in the beginning, fear not, I am not gone quite yet. We've got another year, at least another year, to go with the big picture. But I would like to make a special thanks to all those that we are losing this year. Not that they're dying, but they are leaving URN. Those that are not here, and I hope I don't forget anybody, Daniel and Titus, we are losing them. We are also losing two people here in the studio. Rebecca, you have been fantastic. You've served URN for many years, longer than me, which is a challenge. And I wish you all the best in the future. I'm sure we'll remain in contact. Thank you. And James, you've been all right.
Try my best.
Thanks for coming on to the big picture. And Scarlett, thank you as well. We'll have more of you next year. James, obviously you have been fantastic.
Of course.
I really hope I haven't forgotten anybody else that is leaving us at the end of this year. So sorry if I have. That was just off the top of my head. But thank you. I have been Felix Hawes, as always, and this has been The Big Picture. And I suppose that the Americans might find themselves in a bit of an SOS. We'll see you next academic year in September. Cheerio.